By the mid-1990s, you have tens of thousands, let's say about 50,000 Iranians that are online, and this continues forward in that manner. One of the things that I taught, so the subtitle of my book, it's called The Internet Elsewhere, the subtitle is The Emergent Effects of a Wired World. And in my book, we'll focus on Iran for the purposes of tonight's discussion, but in the book I talk about 3 other countries, South Korea, Senegal, and Estonia. And the reason why I say emergent effects is because this is what I'm really trying to show, is how a country's history collides with internet access and internet development and produces something. In the case of Iran, it produces political speech and a beginnings of people speaking out online against the government. But it also produces, and this is I think the part that gets lost a lot of the time, is an increasing sophistication on the part of the Iranian government in pushing back against those people who are dissenting online, using various means, ranging from filtration, blocking of websites, using surveillance on the internet, using monitoring, things like that. We'll get into that in a little bit as well. But this is kind of where I'm coming from. So one of the things that's important to understand by the late 1990s in Iran is what is starting to happen politically in Iran. I talked about how the Islamic Republic had been founded in 1979 and 1980. And as we move into the 1990s, there was a guy by the name of Mohammad Khatami, who some of you may know because he used to live here in Germany. He became the president of Iran before the current president, Ahmadinejad. He was president of Iran from 1997 until 2005. And by Iranian standards, he was considered as a somewhat moderate. He had lived in Europe, he had studied in Europe, he speaks, I think, English and German. And he is very well versed in Western philosophy and Western thought and education and things like that. And when he was president, one of the things that he did was to try to liberalize the country kind of socially. So for example, he allowed more and more newspapers to be published freely. He allowed more books to be published. He allowed NGOs, non-profits, civil society organizations to be founded and established, which was something that had not existed before that. Remember, he is Mohammad Khatami, this is still the Islamic Republic that we're talking about, so it's not like things went from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. This was still just a moderate opening. But still, I think young Iranians, particularly young, educated Iranians, started to see that as a way to speak out in new places that they couldn't do so before. What's important to understand, I think one of the things that's really important to understand about Iran's contemporary society, particularly with respect to the internet, is that it is a young country. 70% of Iranians in Iran today are under the age of 30. I will turn 30 next month. So if I lived in Iran, I would be well within that group. There's a whole generation of people who are considered to be the children of the revolution, people who have grown up their entire lives after the Islamic Revolution. And as things like internet and satellite TV and other types of media have pervaded Iran, people, I think, are becoming more and more aware of what's happening outside of the country. This is a very different situation than, for example, North Korea, which is a much more restricted space with respect to media. But anyway, so Iran is a young country. It is also a very educated country, and I think this is something that also people don't fully understand. When we talk about internet access and bringing internet access to other parts of the world that don't have it, we sometimes forget that you need to read to be able to use the internet. And that may be kind of a stupid thing to say, but I think it's a really important thing to say. In that, when we talk about bringing internet access to other countries that I've written about, for example, Senegal in West Africa, where the literacy rate is 40%, so 4 out of 10 people can read and write in a language, in that case French. But that means 6 out of 10 cannot, right? That's a huge percentage. In Germany, I would guess, like in the US, literacy is probably in the 90%, something like that. In Iran, it's in a little bit less, it's in about 80% range. That's a very substantial amount of the population that can read and write in a language, in this case Persian. So I think that's important to keep in mind. In addition to literacy, in terms of actual education, about half of the Iranian population is university educated. And in fact, there are more Iranian women that are in Iranian universities today than there are men. So I think that's an important thing to also keep in mind. So Iran is a young country. Iran is an educated country. Iran is also a wired country. Today, we talk about something called, if you read up on articles or papers about the internet, there's this phrase in English that gets tossed around a lot, which is internet penetration. And basically what that means is that if you take the number of people that are online and you divide it by the number of people that live in that country. So I think the internet penetration in Germany and in most of Western Europe is in the 85% range. You probably know maybe your grandparents or great-grandparents or something, maybe you know a few people that aren't on the internet. But probably most, I would imagine, most people in this room, of all the people that you know, I would imagine that probably around 80, maybe even more percent of them are on the internet. In Iran, that percentage is about 35%. So that's low-ish. There are countries, of course, that have less connections than that. But I think that's important to keep in mind that, that 1 out of every 3 Iranians is on the internet. And that this is actually the second highest percentage, by percentage, rate of internet access in the entire Middle East. It's the only country that's higher is Israel. So it's higher than Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Iraq and Turkey and all the other neighboring countries. So Iran is a young, educated, and wired society. This brings me back to President Khatami. And when President Khatami became president in 1987, as I said, he opened up the country's civil society a little bit. And he opened up the newspapers a little bit. And there were people, as this continued into 2000, 2001, some of you may remember the very early days of blogging. It's hard to remember because it was, you know, in internet times 10 years ago. That's like a century. You may remember that there was something called Blogger. It still exists. Google owns it. But there was this online service where anybody could create a blog for free and write whatever they wanted. And people in Iran figured this out too. And there was this Iranian-Canadian guy named Hossein Darakhshan who figured out one day that Blogger supported something called Unicode, which is a type of software that allows you to write in different alphabets. So we all can write in German or English or other languages that use Latin characters. But it's kind of hard, or it was until relatively recently, to write in Korean or Persian or Chinese or Russian or other languages that use different alphabets. So now there's the standard Unicode, and if you have a modern browser or computer, it's probably not a big deal for you. But 10 years ago, this was a big deal because you could blog in Persian and it was very easy to do. So that's good. So this guy, Hossein Darakhshan, he writes up this guide. He teaches people how to blog. He encourages people to blog. He becomes one of the first bloggers. He becomes a big promoter of Iranian blogging. And as a result, a number of people start taking him up on this. And there, in fact, was an early web magazine, an online magazine that was founded in Iran called Cappuccino, that was founded around 2002, 2003. You had writers writing things that they couldn't write in the newspaper. You had a whole generation of blogs. You had one of the first you had Iranian, even women bloggers starting to write about all kinds of things. And they were writing about the kinds of things that, you know, people write about in German blogs or English blogs. Things ranging from, you know, we don't like what the government is doing to here's what I had for lunch yesterday. I mean, they're kind of, you know, they run the whole spectrum of those kinds of things. Not everybody is, you know, fighting against the government. Some people are. Some people who, especially journalists, especially people who are working in this environment where they are, even though they have a little bit more freedom than they didn't have before, they're trying to push the limits even further. And so by 2003, you get into a situation where Iran, unfortunately, becomes the first country in the world to arrest a blogger for the crime of blogging. This was a guy called Sina Motalabi. He currently lives in London. He works for BBC Persian. He was able to seek asylum in the Netherlands later on and eventually migrated to the UK. But I think that is a very early case of what continues to exist in not just Iran, but in many other countries that have the power of the state, have the power of the law, have the power of the judiciary, of the military, of the police, to stop people from saying stuff online. And you know, it's, even though we all may agree, or those of us who live in free societies may agree that it's a good idea to let people speak out online, other countries don't necessarily feel the same. So by 2003, you have this guy, he gets arrested. You have a number of other people who by the following year, 2004, get arrested. There's a whole bunch of Iranian journalists. I profiled one of them in the book, a guy called Omid Memarian. He was held in prison for about two months. and suffered beatings and psychological torture. He was asked to write all kinds of things about what his activities were, things like that. They accused, his interrogators accused him of collaborating with Iran royalists. If you remember from the brief history, this is the government before the Islamic Republic. The Iranian royal family, or what's left of it, now lives actually primarily in the United States, outside Washington and also in Connecticut. They accused him of collaborating with them. They accused him of collaborating with expatriate Iranian websites run from Europe and continued to beat him when he told them that he didn't have any connection with them. And in fact, in one of the cases where Omid was under interrogation, his interrogator, who clearly didn't know anything about how the internet works or how the World Wide Web works, because one of Omid's blog posts had been linked, just linked, from a different website, the interrogator basically was thoroughly convinced that Omid had somehow been in collaboration with this other website. And when he finally, and they continued to beat him, and he continued to deny that he had any connection to them, and finally he admitted to faxing his blog post to this other website, and then the guy believed him, even though that was completely ludicrous, and anybody who's used the web for 5 minutes can understand the concept of linking, but this guy could not and did not. Is what is starting to happen politically in Iran. I talked about how the Islamic Republic had been founded in 1979 and 1980, and as we move into the 1990s, there was a guy by the name of Mohammad Khatami, who some of you may know because he used to live here in Germany. He became the president of Iran before the current president, Ahmadinejad. He was president of Iran. By the mid-1990s, you have tens of thousands, let's say about 50,000 Iranians that are online, and this continues forward. History collides with internet access and internet development and produces something. In the case of Iran, it produces political speech and a beginnings of people speaking out online against the government. But it also produces, and this is I think the part that gets lost a lot of the time, is an increasing sophistication on the part of the Iranian government in pushing back against them in that manner. One of the things that I taught, so the subtitle of my book, it's called The Internet Elsewhere, the subtitle is The Emergent Effects of a Wired World. And in my book, we'll focus on Iran for the purposes of tonight's discussion, but in the book I talk about 3 other countries, South Korea, Senegal, and Estonia. And the reason why I say emergent effects is because this is what I'm really trying to show, is how a country, those people who are dissenting online, using various means, ranging from filtration, blocking of websites, using surveillance on the internet, using monitoring, things like that. We'll get into that in a little bit as well. But this is kind of where I'm coming from. So one of the things that's important to understand by the late 1990s in Iran